Judge Batelga started out the door and didn't look back. Chatty Dawson was looking at the lust in the sheriff's eyes, and for just a moment she considered grabbing up the lamp and throwing it on the fat, blithering idiot of a man that Sheriff Pogues was. She herself might die in the blaze, but it would make her feel so good to do it. Apparently, she was going to die on the end of a rope anyway. She turned around and started getting dressed, resigned to believe that the Sundown Bandit was dead and would not be back to help her ever again. No, thought Chatty as she slipped her dress back on. No, she's not dead yet. Wait until you see her dead, then believe it, like Doubting Thomas. Then, thought Chatty sadly, I'll believe. "Are you ready, then?" asked Kitty Cat Batelgus, as she got the rest of her things packed and saddled onto the back of Queen's Ride. "Yes," said Jack, trying to get to his feet. Oh, it was night again, and he was hurting. Midnight, and the house was quiet. Everyone had been in bed a long time. Clive had put Kitty Cat's supper, a heavily laden tray of food, just inside the doorway of the darkened room. He had called into the room to speak to Kitty Cat, but he dared not enter therein. Mrs. Batelgus would have beaten him within an inch of his life if he so much as got close to Kitty Cat. He knew he was a little slow of learning, but he would not have molested Kitty Cat for anything. "Miss Kitty Cat," called Clive, "your mamma says for you to come on out now, but if you don't, well, here's some food for you." "Shut up, Clive," said Kitty Cat, "and go to bed." "Whatever you say," he told her. "Good night," closing the door and locking her back into the room again. Clive had been in bed about 3 hours when Kitty Cat and Jack started packing their things. They had eaten all of the overladen tray and were now ready to travel, their stomachs full and ready. Kitty Cat was a changed woman. It was her own doing, and what had she expected? He was a man who had needs. She had offered it to him, and he had accepted. Was he going to turn down a shot of that? Absolutely not. He had thoroughly enjoyed it. She had started with the ointment stuff, which smelled like eucalyptus extract, and she wanted that rubbed all over her backside. He did that for her. Next, she wanted him to play with her, and after that, it had been downhill from then. Jack Jacobs had scored his very first virgin, and it was fantastic. Now he had to get her out of here, and himself as well. They were going to steal 2 of the judge's horses. Queen's Ride would carry their few belongings and enough food for all 5 of them, the 3 horses and the 2 people. It would last about 2 days in this weather, but by then they would have found another barn somewhere north of here. As they got closer to the Montana Territory, the barns would be getting closer together. By the time one farmer could complain about another to the fact that there were vagabond tracks in and out of the barn, they'd be to the next one, always one step ahead. That was nice. Jack saddled 2 nice saddles on the horses, and Kitty Cat was taking her own with her. Her horse was called Vengeance. It seemed appropriate tonight. They got ready and led 3 of the horses from the barn quietly. No one stirred within the house, and no one saw them go. Once outside, Kitty Cat started to mount her horse and prepare to leave. Jack put his hand on her shoulder and handed her the coat that Clive had thrown into the room for her when he had given her the supper tray earlier. She smiled, and he slipped it around her shoulders, and then he reached down and kissed her passionately on the lips. She felt a flash of fire go through her belly, and he drew her gently towards him, smiling. "You started it, babe," said Jack, his voice husky with desire, "and now you caught me. I'm your outlaw, and I ain't never gonna let you go." Jack had gotten virgin all over him, and he was really sappy just now. He went down on one knee, as if he was going to help her onto her horse, but then he grabbed her hand firmly and kissed it. Kitty Cat stared at him, wide-eyed. "Kitty Cat," said Jack. And then softer he said, "Catherine Batelgus." She responded, licking her trembling lips. "Will you marry me? For real?" "You want me?" asked Kitty Cat, in awe. "That's the offer," he said. "Will you do it?" "Yes," she said, nodding up and down. Suddenly she was as sweet a girl as there had ever been. He kissed her again and helped her onto her horse. He mounted his own horse, and together they led Queen's Ride off behind them, laden with whiskey, bandages, peanuts, and whatever else they had managed to save from their meals together. "Hi," said Jack, giving the horse the go-ahead, and they started forward now towards the north. For the first time since his arrest, Jack felt like a free man. The posse from River's End had followed Jack to the Batelguses' farm that first night, but had decided to give up and go home before they ever got there. They had all decided to just go back home, unaware that they had all passed within 50 feet of Jack Jacobs, as he had been sleeping in the arms of Kitty Cat Batelgus, the judge's daughter, in their first night together in the barn. They would never find him again. Chatty Dawson dressed herself under the lustful, watchful eye of the Sheriff Pogues, and then she was handcuffed securely in the same bracelets that she had handcuffed Deputy Marklenberg during the jailbreak. She was now handcuffed in front of her, as propriety dictated for ladies. The cuffs weren't too tight, nor anything like that. Except for the pain in her heart, she was really quite comfortable. The pain was for the Sundown Bandit. They still hadn't mentioned her. The sheriff led her gently down the steps of the Lady Luck saloon and out the old swinging doors. The night air was rich, and as she regarded the eastern horizon with the slightest chill in the air, she saw the beautiful colors of dawn, sunrise, the thing that happened every morning, the thing that happened well after a night was dead and gone. Well, after yesterday's sundown. Yesterday's sundown might be gone, she sniffed, but she would never be forgotten. Chatty thought she should be crying by now, but she thought she might break down into tears any moment, and none would come to her. Tears were sacred and personal, and her body, no matter how hard she tried, would not let her be crying in front of these jerk-offs. She didn't care if they saw her or not, but her own body refused to give her this release in their presence. She hated these men even more for that, especially Batelgus. She walked on out of the saloon and across the street to the buckboard. Batelgus was watering the horse, and staring at her, as usual. "How is it going to sound, Chatty Dawson," asked Batelgus, "when I tell your mama I caught you in bed with the Sundown Bandit, wearing no clothes?" "I was not in bed with her," screamed Chatty, "when you came in. She was in the stables, and I had my underpants on. We didn't do anything, not like you wanted to do to me." Batelgus trembled in red-faced rage. Chatty hoped he'd keel over dead. It would serve him right. "Yeah," said Chatty. "You wanted me to beg you, didn't you? That's what does it for you, you old pervert, doesn't it? You like to be begged. That's why you're a judge, aren't you? You like to be worshipped and begged, and, well, I would die first." Patelgus waited until she had finished before he spoke. Pogues was no longer standing behind her. She wondered where he had gone. He had gone back to search the area for something. For what? He had gone back to search for the Sundown bandit. They hadn't caught her yet. Chatty read his mind and stood up straight, smiling. She peered over his shoulder towards the darkened barn and saw nothing at all. Frater was gone. Chatty's hopes soared, but no. She kept Frater over in... Where was it? Over there. Yes, the barber shop. Maybe, maybe not. She had no way of knowing. She looked at Betelgeuse and grinned most wickedly at him, saying, "Lost her, didn't you? She's not here, is she? You ain't killed her 'cause you can't catch her." "She left you here with us," said Betelgeuse, retaliating. "She'll find herself a better little girl than you, probably prettier, who will ride with her. If she loved you all that much, she'd have took you with her." Chatty's little lip trembled, despite the fact that she knew he was trying to mess up her mind. Then she remembered what Sundown had told her, and how much Sundown did love her. A criminal like her loved Chatty, and even though she was an outlaw, she wouldn't do that to Chatty. She wouldn't treat Chatty Dawson any way, but straight up and down. Sundown would rescue her before they got to River's End. Chatty knew it, and the thought made her warm all over. "We'll see," said Chatty Dawson, "if another little girl like me ever gets that honor again, you pig." Betelgeuse wanted to cheerfully kill her where she stood, but he was thinking. A question had been bugging him for a long time. "From what we understand," said Betelgeuse, "from all the accounts we were able to gather, why didn't you just run to one of the Pinkerton men when you thought Sundown was on that train? If you was sure it wasn't his horse out there. I admit Pythagoras is a strange-looking beast, and it's not easy to forget the sight of him, even all done up in that whitewash like Sundown liked to do him." "Pinkerton men are useless," yelled Chatty. "I was afraid. I was scared to death he would put that gun in my face. That's when I thought it was a he. And I went crazy with fear. I jumped off the train and ran as hard as I could for the back of it. I went up that tower like a scared rabbit, waiting for the Sundown bandit to leave. But Pinkerton's fool started shooting at me. I didn't know. I didn't find out he was a woman until I was halfway across the prairie. And the fact that you were in love with him didn't hurt anything either, did it? Love," she said, "never even entered into it." "We aren't what you think." "So you expect me to believe," said Betelgeuse. "Yeah, you just had to stay with Sundown. What about when I told you to drop that shotgun and surrender? Were you afraid she might shoot you as a traitor or something? What was your problem?" "No, I was more afraid of you." Betelgeuse chewed on this for a while. "Well," he said, "Sundown's gone. I don't know where she is, but I need you for bait. I want you in my jail, since she likes to do jail breaks, and I want you to lure her to me." "No," said Chatty. "You have nothing on me, Betelgeuse. Not really. My daddy will come and get me out if you put me in there. He's not going to let me stay in your stinking old jail. And I've already done told you what I would do if you ever touch me again." That was it. She had let her mouth overload her butt. By threatening to kill Betelgeuse, he completely lost it. Betelgeuse walked right up to Chatty Dawson, raised his hand, and smacked her down in the dirt. She fell hard on the ground and raised her handcuffed hands to her trembling mouth. It was bleeding from the corner. She started crying in rage. "You shut your hole," said Betelgeuse, "or I will horsewhip you to death and put you in the ground out here somewhere. The bandit will get blamed for your murder, if she ever shows up anywhere." Chatty would never speak another word to him again after that. She silently swore in her mind that she was the last little girl he would ever strike. She was going to kill him. Chatty Dawson stood up and sniffed. She wiped her bleeding mouth all down her bare arms, and was kind of surprised to see how it looked like war paint. Smearing it on herself like that. She began to remember what her mother said about how men feared blood on a woman. Yeah, that was it. She smeared it all over her face like war paint. She looked like she had been the victim of murder. Yeah, he would be afraid to ever touch her again. Sheriff Pogues winced as he lifted her bodily and placed her in the back of the buckboard for the trip back to River's End and eventually Bad Rock Canyon. She smiled at him and winked. Yeah, she was so bad, smeared in her safe blood. No man would want her now. She looked like she was possessed. Patelgus walked over to the buckboard a few moments later and stared at her. She reveled in the new fear he had on his face. She had been smacked by this man, and she couldn't wait to tell her daddy. She grunted at him like a wild animal, and he almost flinched. The ride back to River's End was very quiet. Chatty made herself as comfortable as possible. She got under an old horse blanket in the back when she heard the deafening approach of hoofbeats. Chatty peeked out from under the blankets, careful not to be seen with all this blood on her. Not till she knew who it was, anyway. "Judge," said a rich male voice. "At your service, sir." Great, thought Chatty. Another suck-up to Batelgus. That was all she needed. The man introduced himself as Captain Bergalton Gerard. "Sir, we have the bandits sighted north of here, and 20 of my best men are giving chase. The rest of us are due in Crossroads Corners right this day. With your leave, I'd like to start that way." "Permission granted. Carry on, Captain," said Batelgus. "Yes, sir," said Gerard. "We'll get him. Count on that." "I trust you will," said Batelgus. "And may I say it was good of you to assist my pitiful posse the other day, when you saw them on the river bank all tripped up, and without a clue as to what to do?" "Townspeople, sir," said Captain Gerard politely. "They have a time in the woods. We were only too glad to help out." "Did you ever recover Jacobs, or is that too much to ask?" said Batelgus. "I don't think so, sir. My scout came back later and said that the posse had gone as far as your place, and had given up the chase." "My place?" said Batelgus. "Yes, sir. They said the trail ended there." said Batelgus. "Those jerks wouldn't know a trail if they left it themselves. Carry on, Captain. I have delayed you long enough." "Sir, did you find the bandit had been here any appreciable time? Or was this a stopover, this Iron Gulch pass?" "It's her base of operations," said Batelgus. "I imagine that a lot of loot could be found once that place is razed to the ground." "Begging your leave, then, sir," said Gerard. "I'll be on my way." "Carry on," said Batelgus, smiling at him. The horses rumbled away from the buckboard as Chatty tried to understand what all she had just heard. There had been a posse after them. Jack had stopped it by somehow tripping someone up. She didn't know how one man could trip up an entire posse. That didn't seem possible. Good old Jack. He had more than paid for his jailbreak. He gave them time to be together one last day, and one last day to make Sundown the woman that Chatty knew she could be. That was worth it right there. That was worth everything. The smack on the mouth, the threat of the whip, this ride home in these stupid horse blankets. She snuggled herself down and sighed. Where was Sundown, she wondered. Sundown the bandit had the 7th Cavalry after her. That was why she hadn't been back to get Chatty. She couldn't. The real law was after her. She would be lucky to get away at all. Jack was being chased. Sundown was being chased. and they had caught little Chatty Dawson. It was all over but the shouting, and her mother, she would do plenty of that. Well, thought Chatty, when I get beaten this time, at least Mother doesn't use a bullwhip. Chatty Dawson arrived back in Bad Rock Canyon several days later on a train from River's End. Well, not exactly River's End, she thought. Though it was larger than Bad Rock Canyon, it had no direct rail hookup like Bad Rock did. They had driven her from River's End to Fort Mesa, and there a detachment of cavalry had ridden her out the 2 miles to where the train came by, and they had officially stopped the train to allow her to get on board. Chatty had boarded the train unchaperoned and was allowed to go home again by herself. There had been no charges filed against her. Batelgus had not even tried to speak to her again. Once they had gotten to River's End, night had been falling. He took her into the jail and placed her in a cell, telling Pogues to instruct her as to what to do next. Pogues had entered a few minutes later with a wash rag and some soap. "Here's perfectly good water Jack left here," said Pogues, chewing on a fresh wad of tobacco. "Unless you want to stay here tonight, Judge Batelgus has ordered you get the blood off of you and act like a lady. If you do so, you can stay in the Brooksway tonight as a guest." "What about the charges against me?" asked Chatty. "There ain't none," said Pogues. "No more handcuffs, either." He unbraceleted her with a quick flash of keys. "You're free to go." "He's not going to spank me at high noon on the steps of the jail?" "I don't understand," said Chatty. "You wouldn't. You're a she-male, and you ain't supposed to understand. Women ain't made to understand Jack, and you don't make no sense either. It's 'cause you are a woman. Just shut your trap around the judge and you won't get your pretty little mouth mashed no more." Neanderthal, thought Chatty. Primate. Chatty was worried that there might be something to evolution after all, with this man in an upright position. "So I am free," she said. "Swear," breathed Pogues, as he turned to walk out of the cell. "She's dense as well as daft. I said so, didn't I? Come on out and I'll walk you to your room across the street. Little hussy." She washed all the matted blood off of her, remembering to use this blood trick some time again if she needed it. They had both lost interest in a blood-smeared Chatty Dawson. Oh, a miracle! Blood ain't all that sexy, is it, Pogues, you fat piece of crap? Going outside, she had been escorted back across the street, where she was fed in the Continental dining room and sent up to her own room for the night. She was treated like a queen from the time Batelgus had left her to the time she had arrived back in Bad Rock. No one ever mentioned charges again. But as her train was pulling back into Bad Rock, she saw her mother standing on the platform waiting for her. She knew the kid-glove treatment was about to come to a screeching halt. No charges would be great, but how in the world would she ever explain to her mother about jumping onto Sundown's back that first day? How was she ever going to buy into that one? When she saw her mother's face, she knew that Mother was buying very little today. As she got off the train and stood looking at her mother, her father ran to hold her. He was crying and sobbing, but Mother wasn't. Chatty stared at her mother over her father's shoulder and wondered what she was going to say. "Well, this is the last trial by fire," thought Chatty. "Best to get it on and see what the deal will be here." "Hi, Daddy," sobbed Chatty, crying on demand. She could do that, and as she stared into her mother's eyes, she saw Mother wasn't buying any of that either. "Hi, Mama," ventured Chatty, but her mother stood on ceremony. "It's so good to have you back in one piece," said Daddy. "I love you so much." Daddy was her saving grace. If Mother swung anything at her at all, it would be in private, when he wasn't home to hear it. For the time being, she was safe. Safe from Mother, who looked as though she was ready to rip her to virtual shreds. They had eaten dinner in town and had gone home almost quietly. They didn't say anything about her little adventure until much later. When she and her mother were at last alone together, a day or so later, it all came out. Mother came into Chatty's room and she shut the door. Around her waist she was wearing a sturdy belt, and Chatty understood the implied threat. It was a new belt. Chatty had never seen it before. It didn't look friendly. "We will talk now," her mother announced as she pulled up a chair and sat down next to Chatty, who was sitting on her bed. Her mother cleared her throat, and she had to rub her eyes before she started speaking. Chatty felt fear well up inside of her. "So," said her mother, "how are you?" "Fine," whispered Chatty. She felt the terror well up inside of her. "Now," said her mother, "I will say this as clearly and succinctly as I know how. Exactly where have you been, and what all have you been doing?" That question, an obvious essay, staggered Chatty. Once her mother had seen that Chatty was fine, she could start making her not so fine. Here it came, and if it didn't end in a furious beating, she would be infinitely surprised. Daddy, of course, would never hear about it. If Chatty told him, Mother would do it again the next time he went out of town. Like he was out of town today. Chatty had feared this day badly. Chatty told her mother everything. She started with the train ride, from the reason she had first left the train, to why she had jumped on the back of the bandit, to the jailbreak, and on through how they had slept with each other to keep warm, and all about how Betelgeuse had slapped her and had smacked her with the whip, and had threatened to whip her to death in Iron Gulch Pass. Everything. All of it. Nothing had been left out. It took her an hour and a half to tell it. In some parts of the story, her mother's eyes would get wide, and in others she would seem to know it already. Strange, but Chatty told her the truth like a woman possessed. "I am guilty of about 5 felonies," she concluded. "I was supposed to be whipped twice and then raped, as a deal with Betelgeuse. He was making it with Daddy for my virginity or something. I should already be dead, but now all of the charges have been dropped. Apparently from one smack across the mouth." She pointed to her mother's belt and said, "Well, what about you, Mother? Do I escape you or not? You brought it, I see. Right now, I'm so tired that I don't really care. You gonna whip me?" She stared at her mother. "I have stared death in the face, Mother. It's quiet on death's side. Why don't you just kill me and get it over with?" Her mother's face went pale. "Sundown told me you hate me 'cause I'm young and pretty. Fine. Go ahead. Hurt me. But she was my friend, whether you like it or not. And I do love her." Her mother pulled a letter out of her belt and dropped it on the floor. It was from Betelgeuse, addressed to Chatty's father. Chatty didn't have to read it. She knew it almost word for word. It was what she had just told her mother. Probably in worse terms, and couched with the accusations of lesbianism, criminality, and wanting to be with a bandit like Sundown, for the perverse thrill of committing crime. "So," said Chatty, "he wrote it all down, did he?" "Yes," said her mother. "You didn't lie to me at all. From what he writes in his letter, you didn't leave anything out." "Except the part about us being funny on each other," said Chatty, "and the part about me wanting to be an outlaw. That part I did leave out, because it's not so. I ain't in love with her that way, you know. I mean, I was when I thought she was a man, but it's different now that I know that the Sundown Bandit is a woman. And I don't want to be robbing banks and trains and running, 'cause you always have to be dealing with people like Betelgeuse. She looked at her mother and bit her lip. Did he tell you I threatened to kill him? No, said Mother, trying to remember the heated letter. No, he didn't mention that, I don't believe. Well, I did, said Chatty, touching her sore mouth. I told him if he ever touched me again I was going to kill him. You did? Asked her mother softly. Her stare was distant and empty. Yes, I did, said Chatty, and I meant it. If I ever get the chance, I'm going to put him in his grave. He doesn't deserve to live any more. Her mother stared at her. You have an awful lot of hate in you, don't you, my child? Yes, she said, and I aim to use it. Well, said her mother, you did get one shot at him, but I don't know that you'll ever get another one. Chatty looked at her mother, who was now seeing her little girl in another different light. Well, I'm not a liar like he is, Mama. He says he'll do something and doesn't do it. But I keep my word. He just better stay away from me. Chatty's eyes filled with tears. I think he's going to try to kill my best friend, the Sundown Bandit. I think he's going to kill Sundown. What he don't know is she promised to stop taking trains and banks if I lived through the jailbreak. That's the sweetest thing anybody ever said to me. And now he's going to kill her dead. But she's lost that killing edge, Mama. She almost got caught on account of me. And he'll get her now. And when he kills her, he better not come near me again. I'll pull his eyes out. The bandit told you she would stop what? Asked her mother. If I live through the jailbreak, the Sundown Bandit promised never to rob any more again. She told you that? Yes, she did. Wow, said her mother. Oh, I wished I had nailed him in the window of that hotel. He lived to slap me down like a dog, Mother. Child, it's a wonder you aren't under the jail. I was in jail, Mama, said Chatty. But to tell the truth, Betelgeuse knew he had nothing on me. I was in the street when he shot at Sundown and me first. Yes, it was a jailbreak, but you don't know that he was going to wrongfully hang Jack Jacobs. Her mother looked at her hard and said, I had heard that. You don't mean it's true, do you? A federal judge was going to purposely commit murder? Yes, said Chatty, and no one can stop me. That's what he said. Well, we sure tried. We went to save a man's life, Mama, not do a crime. There is a distinct difference. Yes, there is, said her mother, standing up, fingering the belt. Chatty shuddered now, despite her big talk. She hated getting a whipping. She hated it. She swallowed while her mother started laughing. Oh, I'm not gonna hit you, said her mother. I'm sorry you thought that. This is just a new belt. Sorry if I scared you. Chatty smiled at her and said, What if I hadn't told you everything that was in that letter, Mama? Would you have beaten me? No, said her mother. I know you better than that. You couldn't wait to tell me what happened. Lord, child, I've never heard such things in my life, that you've lived. It'll be something you remember for the rest of your life. Some big adventure. She looked at her daughter and shook her head. I used to beat you to make you behave your mean self. But I can't beat you for surviving all that time with an outlaw and coming home as clean as you went away. Do you think I hate you because you're pretty? Chatty swallowed in shame. Well, I don't, answered her mother, before she could speak. Sundown sounds very wise, but She doesn't know that because she's never had any kids of her own. Am I right? Chatty nodded. So yeah, maybe from your point of view and hers, it looks as if I hit you because I'm jealous of you. But I'm not. I am you, Chatty. I see myself in your pretty little face and precocious ways. I just want to control the wild spirit I know lives in you. Now I see how that wild spirit has saved your life, and now I'm grateful for it. No, I won't be beating that spirit out of you any more. You have learned to control it for your own survival. You are a woman at last. Chatty bit her lip and apologized to her mother for worrying her so. Said her mother. Pshaw. You couldn't help it. It was fate, my child. Destiny. You had to grow up, and something took you out there to do it. While you were gone, I had to learn to let you go. Her mother kissed her, just like the Sundown bandit liked to do, right on her forehead. And I am happy I could let you be your own woman. Welcome home, baby. They hugged each other for the longest time before they wiped their eyes. Judge Batelgus arrived back on his own farm several hours after he released Chatty Dawson to the custody of Sheriff Pogues, who later walked her across to the Brooksway Hotel for the night. He couldn't stop thinking about her. The little girl had beaten him at his own game. He wandered his horse slowly into the barn, and he found Clive sitting absently on an old wooden pail. The boy's eyes were even more vacant than usual, and Batelgus felt there was something out of place here. He walked his horse up to the boy and handed him the reins as the boy stood up. "What's wrong with you, son?" asked the judge. "It's Miss Batelgus, sir," he said. "She ain't herself. Best to know it from me first, 'fore you go knocking her around for it. It's powerful awful what's been going on round here." He handed the judge a scrap of paper, saying, "I got this out of the punishment room at the end of the stalls. It's from Kitty Cat." The judge read the paper. "Dear Daddy, Mama and me's had words for the last time. We ain't going to get along together in one house. She hit me with that riding crop for the last time. Sorry to be leaving you, but I ought to say I'm with Jack Jacobs. He come this way and he hid out in the room for a day or so. I'm going to be his wife, Daddy. You wanted a man for me, but you never did bring me one. I'm 17 now and an old maid, but not any more. Jack just saw to that. Don't come looking, Daddy. We might see you one day when we've had our first child and gotten hitched up and made it all legal like. Maybe by then," Jack says, "things'll all be better, now that he's family. I hope so. Love, Kitty Cat." Judge Batelgus saw flaming red. Clive could see actual flames coming out of the man's eyes. He threw the letter down and started out of the door of the barn, slamming it behind him as he went. Clive wiped his brow. He was glad that he didn't live in the big house tonight. Judge Batelgus stormed into his house and grabbed his wife by the arm, where she stood by the stove. There were tears already in her eyes, but he didn't see them. He grabbed her and dragged her into the parlor, slamming the great French doors behind them to keep the maids out. He knew his wife was upset, because this was the only time he had ever seen her in the kitchen. Still, that wouldn't save her from his wrath. He had lost his little girl today, and he was ready to kill. "What did you do to Catherine?" yelled Batelgus. "Answer me, woman." "She's run off. I don't know where she went." "She went with Jack Jacobs," he thundered at her. "Did you read the letter?" She nodded, sobbing hard. "I told you about that riding crop, didn't I?" asked the judge hatefully. "No," she said. "Please, no." "Yes," said Betelgeuse, grabbing her off the couch and slapping her like he had done Chatty Dawson in the streets of Iron Gulch Pass. She fell over on the couch with a heavy surrendered thud. "What did I say about that horsewhip of yours?" "You said that I wasn't supposed to hit her with it again," she said. "Or what?" "Or you'd use it on me." "That's right. And when I find her and bring her back here, I'm gonna make her watch. Now you stay here and think about that till I get back. Women can't get along 5 minutes while I gotta do my job, I swear." She pleaded with him not to do it. "You stupid whore," he growled. "You're more concerned about your own butt than you are your daughter's. She's out there being raped by a man I've chased from here to Iron Gulch and back, and all you can think about is yourself." "Well, Mrs. Betelgeuse," he said, "when I get back you will have to worry about yourself for a few days. I'll personally see to that. I'll see to it that you never hit so much as a fly with that horsewhip of yours again. You'll be glad to lay it on the fire and watch it burn up when I'm through with you." He grabbed her again and yelled in her face, "You gonna learn that I do the whipping around here. If I have to beat you and her plumb to death, you will learn to get along. Is that understood?" He didn't wait for an answer. He threw her down on the floor, bruising her hip as he did so. She lay there, racked with sobs and heaving into the dust of the floor as he charged out of the house to get a fresh horse and go looking for Kitty Cat. The captain stepped up on the front porch of the Dawson residence. He knocked on the door, and a young girl answered it. She was short and pretty, with an impish grin in her eyes, but not on her mouth. No, in fact, when she saw the captain, she acted as if she knew him and didn't want to see him. "Good morning, miss," said the captain. "Is your father here?" The girl's mother appeared in the doorway behind her. She smiled at the captain and asked if there was anything she could do for him. They were both a pair of fine-looking women. "Is this John Dawson's residence?" asked the captain. "Yes, it is," said Chatty's mother. "And I am assuming this must be your daughter, Chatty Dawson." "It would be her," said her mother. "What do you need, sir?" "We have an unpleasant task ahead of us this morning, ma'am," he said, removing his hat and revealing his high widow's peak of trail-matted hair. Though combed, it was flat from being under the hat. "We have to ask you to bring Chatty down to the sheriff's office for a few minutes, if you would." While her mother clung mentally to the words "sheriff's office," and her daughter clung to the words "a few minutes," neither of them was sure what he wanted. Chatty felt like it couldn't be too bad if it was just for a few minutes. "What's the trouble?" trembled her mother's voice behind Chatty's ear. "You were the little girl who was kidnapped by the Sundown bandit, weren't you?" asked the nice captain. Chatty nodded rapidly, without thinking what she was agreeing to. "Well, there's a passenger on the train coming into town that we need you to identify for us, Chatty. We think we have the Sundown bandit." "You said identify him," said Chatty's mother. "Is he dead?" "The Sundown bandit is dead," said Captain Gerard. "No," thought Chatty, "that can't be. No." "A lot of people are going to be surprised at that passenger, ladies," said the captain, smiling knowingly. "What do you mean?" asked Chatty. "Why don't you ladies come on downtown and help us identify the bandit? We have a lot of people who are not going to believe this is the Sundown bandit, for reasons which will be obvious to you in time." "They got her," thought Chatty. "Oh no, they done killed Sundown." "We'll see you ladies down there," said the captain, who apparently was not used to taking no for an answer. He put his hat on, touched the brim towards them, and then turned to walk back down to his horse and his escort. The remainder of the 7th Cavalry was at the station, waiting to take charge of the body of the Sundown bandit when it finally arrived. Chatty stood up now, bawling her eyes out on the front porch of her house. Poor Sundown. How could they have killed her like that? She wouldn't have done anything more if they'd have just left her alone. Her robbery days were over. "Chatty," said her mother, coming out on the screen porch of their house and locking the great door behind her. "Your daddy's down at the jail already. Let's go, child." Her mother looked at Chatty pitifully and hugged her little girl's neck tightly. She didn't speak right away. When she did finally say something, she said, "You know it's the will of God, child. All outlaws have no truck with him. You have to understand that she has to pay the same as any man. She was a man, Chatty. She was a man. Don't feel so badly for her. She promised you she would be quit of robbery, but you heard what that escort said when the captain got on his horse. She had robbed a train when they killed her." Chatty nodded bitterly quick, her eyes blurring on her. "Now, she wasn't able to change her spots, child. She's a human being, same as us. But her daddy ruined her, and now she's paid for it. The sins of the father's down on the third and fourth generations of them that hate him. She's died for her father and his crimes." Chatty nodded, but would not be consoled. They could not stop her from crying. Not God, not anyone. She would cry forever, and show them all just how much she had loved the Sundown Bandit. The ride across town was the blackest Chatty ever remembered in her life. She felt like it was her own funeral they were going to attend. It was so black and bad. She didn't attempt to control her crying, not even in public. She let these fools all think she loved Sundown sexually. Chatty no longer cared. For what was reputation if a lie could destroy it? "I'll just bet there was no robbery," thought Chatty bitterly in her heart. "I'll just bet this cavalry, or whoever fired the shot, they just killed her in cold blood. No warning, no nothing." Like Sundown herself had said, it seemed like a lifetime ago now. That first night, or whenever she had said it, about how the cowards and the cutthroat glory hogs will get you while you're pissing behind a saloon, and swear up and down it was broad daylight in the middle of town. Those maggots. They are worse than any bandit ever was. Yellow sniveling cowards. They arrived in the middle of town to see the 9:20 train as it was pulling up, and they went by the station there, and a small crowd had gathered to meet the sheriff. But instead of the sheriff getting off first, some men cleared the way, and the 7th Cavalry appeared out of the crowd to take charge of a black pine box containing Chatty's poor friend, the Sundown Bandit. Chatty felt her sobs take her body in great racking heaves. She could not breathe. Her mother had purposely driven her this way so that she could see the wages of sin unloaded from the train and into a black coach surrounded by the yellow and blue uniforms of the cavalry. They surrounded it by sheer numbers alone, and the ride to the sheriff's office commenced at once. From the back of the train, Sheriff Williams appeared on the platform to speak. The crowd, at last free to move toward the train, now did so, applauding the new lawman as he waved to them. Chatty's mother whipped up the horse, and their wagon rolled on by the train, where the man was speaking. Chatty heard a little of his speech, but before he began it, Chatty made eye contact with John Williams, and they both shared a knowledge together. And for a moment, Chatty somehow knew that John knew more than he would ever tell. Chatty heard a little of his speech as they went by him. "So good to be here with you fine citizens," he was saying. "I see it is a red-letter day for us all, huh? The Sundown Bandit. A great scourge has been lifted from our train rails this day. We can give thanks for that alone. That bandit was the worst one out this way, and our fine lawmen, in whatever uniform, have made us all very proud of them." He waved, and the cheers interrupted him. He did not speak again until Chatty was out of hearing. Her mother was saying nothing at all. Chatty took a great deep breath and felt great pains in her little body. They pulled up behind the black coach, just as they were unloading the box. It was lifted by 4 strong cavalrymen, and one of them took a small banner and tacked it to the lid of the coffin, so as not to interfere with the opening and closing of the lid. The banner was designed to stay on the box from now on, and even after it finally went into the ground. It read, "Property of the United States Cavalry. Prisoner remains." Prisoner remains. Chatty wondered about that. She was the prisoner of the cavalry now, the same as Sundown. She had been ordered by this captain to be and appear before him to gaze upon the spectacle of this poor corpse. Why, she ought to jump off this wagon and tell 'em all where to get off. How dare they say she will gaze at her dead friend? How dare they make her do anything? Let Sundown rest in peace, she thought, but leave Chatterley Jean Dawson out of it. If you are not able to identify these remains as the Sundown Bandit, wait till Halloween. Judge Betelgeuse makes a convincing bandit in a darkened hotel room of a ghost town in the wee hours of a morning, standing with his whip over a naked girl. He likes to dress up. That pervert. Kill him next time. He needs killing. She sniffed in rage and nonetheless followed her mother up the steps to the jail. They went inside with the men to the body of the Sundown Bandit, and they took her into the first room where they had shut the door and had her laid out on the table to get her ready for the viewing. "Chatty Dawson?" asked a gruff voice. Chatty looked up and saw a sergeant speaking to her. "Come here," he said, as though he was about to whip her. She allowed her rage to pass over her, realizing this man was a hard case by nature, and it was nothing personal against her. Whatever. She still didn't like him. "Raise your right hand." He stared at her until she complied with his request. Once she had done so, another man, a uniformed lieutenant, came over to relieve this gruff sergeant of his duties with a smile and a wink. "Now," said the lieutenant, "I have to swear you in, Chatty. The testimony you are about to provide is state's evidence against your kidnapper, the Sundown Bandit. We have to have your word that this is, in fact, the bandit." "Now," he said, taking a Bible out from the desk drawer, "place your left hand upon the word here and swear to me." "Chatty Dawson, do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to provide this inquest, by way of physical observation, will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do." She blinked after she said that and sniffed. These people still weren't thinking the woman in the other room was the Sundown Bandit. They still couldn't believe that a woman was guilty. So why would they take a woman's word for it now, she wondered, and a little girl like me at that? This was the insanity of men, she thought. They can't do anything with facts as presented to them. They have to have everything corroborated. Only women work on intuition. Only women feel when it's right. Men always have to have the hard data. It was time. Chatty felt ice-cold fear ripping through her as they escorted her into the other room. The door swung open ominously, and Chatty was shown right in. She saw there were 8 people here besides herself, and they stood upon terrible ceremony. On the table before them was a black-sheeted body. It was covered from head to toe with a shroud, and no part of the body was visible at all just now. The lieutenant went over to the body and stood by the head of it. The room was cold. Chatty saw the black box over by the far wall that they had taken the body out of, and she gasped to see it packed with ice. More bags of the stuff waited to be refilled. when the body was put back into the coffin for the last time. There was a cavalryman ready with his hammer and nails to seal the body inside. Once Chatty had identified the corpse for them all. "We were able to secure permission of the Seventh here," said the undertaker of Bad Rock Canyon, Mr. Grimm, "to have them come here with Sundown's body for Chatty to identify. We must be quick, however, and not leave the body out too long. It still has a ways to go, and it has to be packed in ice, which is not going to last too long." The lieutenant whipped the shroud off the body before Chatty was ready. As the great black drape came away, there was an awful smell of gases and a stench that might get serious after a day or two. They could not have waited much longer to bring this one here. It would have been way too ripe. Several lawmen covered their faces with their hands. Chatty didn't smell a thing. She stared at the body of the Sundown Bandit. The body was dressed in a long manila riding coat, black gloves, worn boots, blue gingham shirt, and filthy matted hair. There was a lot of dried blood all over the front of the body, and the strands of long strawberry blonde hair fell out from under a black facial cloth. As Chatty looked up at the covered face of her former friend, she looked quizzically up at the man. Was he going to remove this so he could see her? He smiled at her and reached down to unwrap the head of the bandit while he said, "Can you stand to come closer, Miss Dawson? I know this is powerful ripe." She came closer as he unwrapped the head of the Sundown Bandit. He pulled the black cloth off the face, and another wave of smell came off the body. The face came into view as he did so. The face was pale white with a bluish tinge. The cheeks were a bit bloated, and the eyes were held down with two great copper pennies, mashing them together so the bandit would not be able to look up at them after death. The body looked almost like a piece of waxwork. There was something leaking out of the left nostril, but it had dried and could not be wiped away. "Chatty Dawson," said the lieutenant, "the man we have here, is this him?" Chatty Dawson smiled her most comely smile for him, and dried her eyes with a delicate wave of her little gloved finger. She sniffed primly and looked the man right in the eyes. "Yes, sir," she said, "that's him." "Knew it. See the way her little face lit up, didn't you? I told you it was him what was doing it." "I told y'all it wasn't no woman. We'd a done caught a woman by now." "Pay up," said a fourth, sticking his hand out to an unidentified soldier. Chatty Dawson looked at her mother, whose eyes had gone completely shocked. Chatty Dawson, under oath, had just sworn that this was the Sundown Bandit. But what about the woman? What about the whole story? Her little girl was a liar. Chatty smiled right back at her mother, for her joy knew no bounds. This was a Sundown Bandit, but it wasn't her Sundown Bandit. It wasn't Sunshine Jacobs. It wasn't her dear friend at all. There was a God. Chatty would try and explain to her mother on the way home. Her mother still had not understood when they pulled up in front of their house. In fact, she had not spoken a word to her at all since she had claimed that that was the Sundown Bandit. She said one thing to her: "Go to your room." The harbinger of the belt. "No," said Chatty, and her mother's eyes got wide. "You listen first, then you can start swinging your old belt." "All right," said her mother, dropping the reins on the floorboard of the buckboard. "Say on, then." "I didn't lie, Mother. He asked me if that was the man who was lying there, and I said that was him. That's not a lie." Her mother thought about it for a moment, and then finally caught on. "The lieutenant asked me, the man we have here, is this him, and I merely agreed with him. I didn't say that was the Sundown Bandit. They didn't ask me that. If they had, I would have said, no, this isn't her. She is still alive, and you fools have the wrong man. You could have beaten me for saying that, for I would have, too. Fools. Men, it's a wonder they don't all fall off the edge of the earth for thinking it's flat. Her mother buried her head in her hands and laughed harder than she had in years. I think you are her daughter, said her mother, referring to the Sundown Bandit. I couldn't have had anything as crafty as you are. Yes, you could, said Chatty, hugging her mother, and you did, too. Well, you're right, then, said Chatty's mother. Let them bury the Sundown Bandit. If your friend didn't lie to you, then she'll quit robbing trains, and the Sundown Bandit is dead anyway. She didn't lie, Mama. She's a good girl now, like me. Chatty's father arrived a few moments later. They had just passed each other, for he was leaving the jail to go to the station when they were going to identify the body. Well, you're looking better, little Chatty. You all through downtown? Yes, Daddy, said Chatty. It's over now. Thank God it's over. Judge Batelgus rode hard towards the north, following the trail of his quarry and his daughter at the same time. He would kill Jack Jacobs the moment he laid eyes on him. There was no getting around that. He was dead meat. He had defiled his daughter. His mind drifted back to the news that they had killed the Sundown Bandit, but that it had turned out to be a man. That half-wit Captain Gerard. How could he tell Batelgus that Sundown was a man? They had obviously killed one of the copycatters instead. Well, whatever. Let them have their fun, but when the next train gets hit, they'll be looking mighty stupid indeed. He recalled the conversation he had had prior to leaving for home, and all this confusion with his little girl. Gerard had said something like this. But, Judge, he was wearing the hat and the coat and everything. You don't see it, do you? Screamed Batelgus, going over to the bags he had tied to his horse. He whipped out the Sundown Bandit's hat and coat and gloves that he had worn for Chatty that night upstairs in the hotel room of the Lady Luck Saloon. I have her junk here, man. She's not going to be dressed like this when you see her again. Captain Gerard would not be buying that, though. Well, let him believe a lie. I got to take the body to Bad Rock, sir, and see if Chatty Dawson can give us a one way or the other on it. Oh, Gerard, she'll say yes, knowing the crafty little whore she is, said Batelgus. Some of the people who identify the body ain't going to believe it anyway, said Gerard. He was wearing a strawberry blonde wig, of all things. A woman's wig of hair. Can you believe a man would wear that in public? Batelgus closed his eyes now as he rode along by himself, thinking about that fool Gerard. I'll tell Chatty when I see her, and her mother, said Gerard. There's some what ain't going to believe it at all because of that wig. But we didn't take the wig off the body. The idiot had glued it to his head. Can you believe that? How would you believe such a man capable of robbing a train? Judge Batelgus had tried once more to tell Gerard. Gerard, Chatty said the Sundown Bandit was a woman, not that she looked like a woman. Now Batelgus thought about Kitty Cat, his daughter. Sweet child, though Lord knew she had her mother in her, up to the quick. Well, it would be best to let her watch as he whipped her mother for allowing this to be. She would see that Batelgus was the head of his house, and not any of the females. Females need beating once in a while. A good thrashing sets them in their place and makes them manageable. And Chatty needed one so bad. He could have done it too, but he had chickened out. She had destroyed his lust to beat on her by defying him, and he hated that. He had wanted her to beg him. That was why he was a judge, after all, like she had rightly accused him. Even slapping her face didn't feel good. Like he knew it wasn't going to be enjoyable. She'd got him back, too, with that little trick of smearing herself in her own blood. How did women come up with things like that? He rode on now, still steamed up over Kitty Cat, to the point that the cold didn't faze him at all, and it was beginning to get a mite chilly where he was headed. "Do you think he'll come for us at all?" asked Kitty Cat, as she and Jack slipped into a barn out in a field for the night. There was no house in sight. There might not be anyone coming out for them tonight, and no one to catch them out here. Jack swallowed. She would want him again tonight, like all the nights since they had met. She was great. Her tight little body never quit, and she'd say the strangest things to him that just blew his mind. How wonderful. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about it. Every night before they did it, they would say their marriage vows to each other, as a promise to be actually wed. It was her idea, actually, because she said it made her feel better about doing it. To him it was foreplay. Good, straight-up and swift old foreplay. She was blowing his mind right out of the top of his head. He would get tickled by thinking to himself, "I'm screwing that old judge at last. I'm finally getting back at him." They went into the barn and saw 3 old horses, used mostly for plowing by the sway in their backs, old mares with nothing left in 'em but a few good turns in the field. They saw some dried fruit from the summer and some other foodstuffs, chestnuts and what else. "'Tis the season," Jack thought, as he grabbed up a healthy raw chestnut and ate it in 2 shell cracks with his teeth. They made their camp, made their bed, and laid down in it. "Oh, Jack, I have this ache for you. It's so good. I just want it all over me." "Me too," he said. "It is good, isn't it?" "It's so good," she said, "that sometimes I can't stand it." Whatever else Jack had had in his mind the night he wandered into Betelgeuse' barn to escape her daddy, he was caught now by his daughter. Just as Chatty Dawson had caught the Sundown bandit, Jack had been caught by the judge's daughter, and he was dying happy about it. They had been in this barn about 3 hours when they finished eating what they could find, and had finished doing their nightly release in each other's arms. They were lying together now, almost asleep. The wind was blowing colder outside, and they snuggled together to keep warm. It was almost hot in that barn, thanks to the horses, and the natural fermenting of the hay packed floor to ceiling in the place. Hay had that insulating effect that made a barn really nice. This barn was perfect. They were almost asleep when Jack heard a noise outside. Queensrÿde, standing over next to one of the horses that belonged in this barn, snorted in fear, but Jack ignored it. Nerves, he told himself. Just nerves. He was asleep in seconds. Judge Betelgeuse opened the door to the barn and walked inside. They were in here. He could smell his daughter. Even as a baby he could smell her scent. It had a smell that he could identify. The barn had harbored all the smells and preserved them perfectly. They were here. Judge Betelgeuse walked right over and pointed his shotgun in Jack's face, telling him not to move. When Jack got his eyes open again, he was staring down the barrel of the shotgun. He had not heard Betelgeuse tell him not to move, but after seeing the gun, he didn't have to tell him.